Hello. Okay, there we go. Sound. Hopefully that worked. I had to play the intro first. So if that worked, let me know in the chat. Sweet, we already have a like. So maybe it worked. See, have started yet or just slow? It has started. Is it going slow? My internet's been having some issues, so if it's pretty bad, I'm gonna get off of Instagram and then I will jump onto just YouTube alone, and hopefully that helps. Looks like. If you're on YouTube, let me know in the chat how the stream looks. But it does look like it's going a little slow. So I might jump off of Instagram. We will see. Res Philosopher, how's it going? I'm still not taking anybody into the video if anybody requests to join this time, but I will be eventually doing that. Maybe even this week. I will do an Instagram stream where people can jump on and talk to me. We'll see what happens. It's kind of nerve-wracking. It's like, that's like, Instagram Live is like a box of chocolates. You never know where you're going to get. Hello. Okay. Is a theory of everything pointless? No, it is not pointless. People ask me this all the time. And actually, I did once watch this guy supposedly present he was a physicist, supposedly present his theory of everything, and then he was like, and now what? You know? And he's like, nothing. That's what? You know, it's completely pointless. It's not pointless. It's just that nobody understands the context of what this is really talking about. And because of that, we don't really understand the proper application. The proper application of a theory of everything is to help you build structures that take consciousness into account, and to help you find objectivity when building those structures. So anything that interacts with human consciousness, or any consciousness, which is everything, is going to need to understand the theory of everything. But the first applications, and the most obvious applications of this, are going to be like things involving government and social media and, communication tools and things like that. But after that, people who are able to bridge this stuff with the details of, all that we observe within relativity, those people will be able to use it for engineering purposes. I don't know what those could be. It could be anything from warp transportation to instant communication across, vast distances. I mean vast distances, like infinite distances almost. So it doesn't... I can't tell you exactly how to do that, but I will say that it all has to do with entanglement. Like, to understand entanglement is to understand the structures that our reality is currently known to be built from, but to understand the relationships that are on that level in a way that is more detailed than what we currently understand. Because what we currently believe is, as I've been told, many times this month, is that, hadrons aren't conscious, atoms aren't conscious, molecules aren't conscious, cells may be conscious, but like, you know, atoms are definitely not conscious. And it's like, atoms are definitely conscious. And understanding that, and understanding that they follow actually the same rules that you and I do, will really help us in necessarily, but working together with those atoms, which is such a weird foreign concept, and I do get that, but it is actually a true concept. That is the way that it is. I mean, lies. Maybe. Bro, people are already doing this. I'm sure some people are already doing this. I've seen it. So, I don't doubt you at all. In fact, there are some things that I wanted to look at actually tonight regarding just some details of what some people are saying about theories of everything, because right now one of the things that I'm trying to do is I'm trying to understand the details of geometric unity, because I understand the philosophy of it really well, like better than anyone else out there. That's a fact. I mean, besides Eric Weinstein, who created the theory, obviously, but like understanding the details of of some of the more key mathematics is going to be important. And just because, you know, we're going to, like, this is called the theory of Every0ne. This goes two ways. This goes, you know, there is a theory of Every0ne, which is the true theory of everything. And it also goes towards, you know, discussing people's various different interpretations on what they're calling a theory of everything. But if your theory, then only Sentient Singularity Theory is a true theory of everything. Like, a true theory of Every0ne. Nothing else is. Like, geometric unity appears to be the closest otherwise, but that doesn't even mean that it is. So I'm trying to figure out exactly like where the limits of that are. But one of the things that I did find is that I've been listening to the Geometric Unity lecture, and I can show it to you. Share screen. First of all, let's look at this. Oh wait, hold up. People that see the pattern. So what I mean by that is, just look at this. This is, I believe, the ceiling of La Sagrada Familia, which is like the most incredible, like, just church that exists. And it's interesting how much it lines up with, oh man, I don't even have it here. Art. This that I made. When you look really carefully at it, by the way, I didn't do this like trying to find, like, I'd never even heard of this La Sagrada Familia, but look, like, whoever designed that church understood God to some degree. Like, that's amazing. It's just this, there's only one pattern, like I said. But one of the things that I did realize that was interesting is I've been studying this, and
Chapter 3. There are payoffs to the magic beans trade. The big
okay,
issue
so
here is that
I've been looking at this discussion by Eric Weinstein on, that's his PowerPoint at the end of, you know, the special presentation Geometric Unity, and guys, he called a super literal, guys. So he put this you, and he's basically talking here about how it's a you looking at itself. And as you can see, let me just make sure that we're seeing it on YouTube. Okay, you are. Good. He's saying the universe as self-contemplative system. Okay, a consciousness, that's what that means, guys. Okay, like we might not have consciousness scientific narratives right now. And I would bet that as soon as we do have it very well defined in a model form, which is my model, then unfortunately it means that probably as soon as the masses get aware of an idea, they twist it and they don't understand it. Like even the idea that like evolution is opposed to creationism, or that free will is opposed to determinism. This is just like what I mean by this. The masses get a hold of an idea and they just destroy it. But that's an inevitable thing, and you just kind of have to know that. And until the messianic, all wisdom is accessible along with all knowledge, then, until then, we're just stuck to that unfortunate reality. But a self-contemplative system, or a you looking at itself, is a consciousness. It's you looking at yourself. You looking at yourself. It's super literal, guys. And he busted out a super literal during this, and I was like, I gotta show everybody this, because this is just fascinating. But I do think that he's kind of stuck in some things, because he's talking about how the solving of this problem is that the hardest part of solving this problem is that it has to do with a learning to model a fire that lights itself. And there is no fire that just lights itself. There's just the eternal flame that never has not been lit, and that is God. And that is a logical inevitability when you understand that time comes from the interaction between multiplicity of consciousness. Pre-creation in this lecture, or, beyond creation of multiplicity, there is no time. It's not that, it's just infinitely long. It's infinitely long and infinitely short at the exact same time. It's just a superposition. There is no time. Trying to think about it as far as a very long time or a very short period of time prior to creation is just, you can't even really say prior to. It's like beyond creation is just wrong. It's just there is no time outside of multiplicity. So beyond creation of multiplicity, there is no time. So literally, it is inevitable that whatever existed beyond creation of multiplicity, not beyond creation, not beyond existence, because there is no beyond existence. Existence always exists. That is God. God creates multiplicity via creation, and that is how we get the emergence of space-time. But beyond that, not prior to that, beyond that, there is no space-time, and you're just existing. You're just existing. That's it. So this idea of like trying to find an equation that lights itself is wrong. But when we look at my, sentient singularity theory, where is it? Come on, internet. You've got it. You can see that I write right here, given that perspectives come from consciousness and consciousness comes from perspectives, a quantum of consciousness and its entangled perspectives are simultaneously the creation and creator of each other. So this right here solves this hands drawing hands problem. Perspectives create consciousness, consciousness creates perspectives, perspectives create consciousness, consciousness creates perspectives, and it's just this circle of information that is self-referencing. You looking at yourself. But what's interesting is
maybe the letter U is in some sense analogous to the paper, and somehow the I, rather than the hand, is drawn across, is intrinsically always a question. People are animated by it, but I don't know that people have actually worked on it.
whether or not it has meaning. It's just it's not random nonsense that a U can look at itself like that. I've been thinking about like G. It's like G is almost a circle, but then instead of going just around in a circle, like, an O or a 0, it instead chooses to make a 90-degree turn and go back in on itself. That is fascinating, because that's basically exactly what God did to create.
Quote, maybe even was my thesis problem, was he asked whether the creator had any choice in how the universe was constructed. And so I think if you believe that the canvas is itself that which generates
God,
all of the content and all of the action, you're left with a puzzle as to how would you move forward from this. It might be easier in a mathematical sense to temporarily put the U on its back, to put it more in line with a standard picture that many mathematicians and physicists will be familiar with.
okay.
In sector 1 of the...
So an observerse, which is, observation is a perspective by consciousness. So, but what's interesting is that I'm still going through this because I can't claim to understand this yet. I'm right here. But he's showing a W, okay? And also what's interesting is that he's got normal, mathematical symbolism and English letters, and also he's got Hebrew going on over here. And when I saw this and I saw that he was basically using U and a W as a super literal reference, I was like, I was not surprised at all, but I was actually a little bit surprised. I had a superposition of surprise, but this W, and I've been wondering for a while, does geometric unity contain the double helix as a structure, as part of its system? Because I can see it in my models, and I've never heard Eric Weinstein say that it's contained within geometric unity, but he does reference, the double helix as being beautiful and being, discovered by Watson and Crick, but he doesn't say that it's related to his theory at all. But here, he's starting to show that there is this W aspect of this that is, I'm guessing, related to the double helix. And I'm not quite sure yet because I'm not done with the lecture. But even just looking at this math here, what we do have here, it just looks correct. Like, this looks very similar to basically what I've been doing. I haven't set it up like this, obviously, because I mean, to some degree I have. Like, some of these equations are pretty similar to what I've done, but you have to dive into Excel to see that that's even what I've done, because, these are all equations. But normally I have the equations hidden behind here. So you can see an equation for this would be right here. You can see an equation. It's just, the two previous added together, but it's very simple, but you can see right here, here's another equation. So there's equations just dictating what's going on here. But the fact that he's talking about W's over here definitely suggests to me that the double helix is part of geometric unity. There is this it's like that double cover that people talk about, which I think is like the torus. The torus is the double cover, I'm pretty sure. That's what some people have called it, but it's just looking, it is one object looking at itself from the inside out and the outside in at the same time. That's what it is. But I found out some more gravy for you guys, just because I've been trying to just prepare my, like, not prepare, but get deeper into like some of the math. But I was looking, and there's this guy named Randall Carlson. I highly suggest you check out. He does like sacredgeometry.com or something like that. But if you Google Randall Carlson on YouTube, you will see he does all these super long videos. They're like hours long about geometry. One of the interesting things that I saw him say, and I actually didn't even know this, I'm being honest, guys. I'm sure I probably heard it at some point, but it, like I said, when you're not ready for something, it just like goes right over your head. A tetrahedron is the three-dimensional structure that has 720 degrees of angles, which is fascinating because the universe goes through 720 degrees of rotation. The fermions go through 720 degrees of rotation to come back to, their original location. That means that the universe is going through, if you go 360, one way and then 360 vertically. I would liken this to seeing what is around you and also what is below you and above you. And it's interesting because this generates four walls around you, or four planes, but when taken into context of what is above you and what is below you, it's 6 planes. It's 6 flat surfaces, the floor, the ceiling, and all 4 walls. This is basically what I'm seeing is that, like, this is the view, the amount of perspectives necessary to perceive yourself within another, and to perceive the other that you're within, and to perceive the others that are within you. So basically, it's to see around you and to also see where you are in the hierarchy. What is below you in the hierarchy, and making up your what is the assembly that makes you up, and what is it that is above you that you are, that is an assembly of you, and those on your level essentially. But when you look at this quantum of consciousness model that I have, that is the 9 square, and by the way, the digital root, I didn't know how to explain it, we're going to look at it tonight. The digital root of all geometry is 9. So we're going to actually look at some Randall Carlson videos tonight, because I think that they really put a lot of context to what geometric forms that we don't necessarily perceive as my dog is barking, so sorry. I think my fiance is home. But perceive as part of conscious interactions, essentially. Okay, let's see some questions real quick. Things not being conscious is lies. Yeah, things not being conscious is, well, things are not conscious. So this pencil is not conscious. But the molecules that make it up are conscious. The atoms that make up those molecules are conscious. And the hadrons that make up those atoms are conscious. And we're going to talk about tonight a little bit why. I think I have basically seen this structure this mathematical structure that is allowing for decision making. It's funny, the guy who I got into it last week on the Discord with had said, hadrons are definitely not conscious beings, and I said they are conscious beings, and he was like, well, they don't make any choices, and I was like, they do make choices. And his counter to that was, well, then we wouldn't be able to predict anything. And I responded with, and this is just true, and it's true of all of us, not just him, is that you do make choices and you're still predictable, is what I said. And that's true of all of us. We're all still predictable. You can kind of predict where we're going to be for the most part during the day. If you know us and you know our schedules and you know our habits, you can predict pretty much exactly where we're going to be. If you know, our likes and dislikes, you can predict the choices that we're going to make when presented with, 3 different dessert options. You can, if I have a chocolate milkshake, Jell-O, and, I don't know, a angel food cake in front of me, and my fiance has to make a prediction of which one I'm going to choose, she's going to know exactly which one I'm going to choose, because that's just the reality. And a choice, because as we've discussed before, a true choice is anytime you have an instance where you have an opportunity to go with or against your nature, and there is a choice between going with or against your nature if your nature is in conflict with a higher truth. And this is something that I've kind of run up against with some people who are, would define themselves as atheists. But there are no atheists. There's just anti-theists and theists. But is that this, I understand this is a problem. So it's very hard to say that there is even that you can. I think it's called presuppositionalism. It's like somebody labeled it as in a discussion that I had, and he defined it as, and I'd have to look it up to see if it's, this is the specific definition or if it's just this definition in the context that, of the conversation that was being had. But it's that you can't even understand the world unless you presuppose God, the existence of God. I would argue that I would argue that that's almost true. But if you come from a religious family and you've never really questioned the existence of God, maybe you actually do have to presuppose the non-existence of God and look for evidence of that in order to understand the world. But if you are default someone who is, not to which or sentient existence, sentientness to existence is not obvious to you, then I would argue you probably do have to presuppose God exists and look for evidence of it in order to test whether or not you actually understand the world, or whether or not that new mentality actually makes sense. And I did that, and that's how I, would no longer define myself as an atheist. Isn't it profound how all our architecture is geometric? Everything is geometric. And the reason why everything is geometric is because imagine an atom has a perspective. Okay, so if this is a consciousness, which is a tetrahedron, which has 720 degrees of angles, imagine that this part of it right here, where I'm holding, is you. And you're looking out, and you can see, let's say you see length, width, height. Okay? You're seeing 3 perspectives when you're looking at the spatial dimensions. Okay, so now you're going to look at time, and you're going to see past, present, future, all basically coming in. Information is coming in from those 3 points towards, your center point. And it's of triality, but always 2 of those would be degrees of freedom, and one of them is always a constraint, actually, in some way. But finding out how that is sometimes difficult. Even with the primary colors, when you look at colors, or if you look at additive color mixing, or subtractive color mixing. Subtractive color mixing is, I think, what they use in, like screens where it's like red and blue and green, and then additive color mixing I think is like printers, so it would be cyan, magenta, and yellow. One of those always is different than the other two. So like, and it's usually green is different than red and blue, obviously, but that's at least true in, that's probably true. But for cyan, magenta, and yellow, I'd have to look at it. You waved at D last. Did I wave at you, D last? I don't even know how to wave at people, but that's cool. I'm glad I waved at you. Those are the only structures we build. Exactly. The only structures we build. That's just like how structures emerge. It's just inevitable. It's about the perception of relationship between multiplicity of points. Like, I can't think of any other perspective other than what is, geometric perspective. Isn't this the moment of creation? Both the first and the last. Praise the sun. The moment of creation, the first and the last. That's something that I think about a lot. It's definitely true that the end of one aeon is the end of the periodicity of one aeon is the beginning of the periodicity of the next aeon within. Or let's say this: the end of the periodicity of one cosmological verse is the beginning of the periodicity of the next cosmological verse. But we'll take a look at that. But let me see. You do too. Hopefully he didn't present it to that one singing chick, because she's not into it. I know that he has one. I mean, everybody wants even the physicists want Sabine Hassenfelder to look at their theories, but she's not going to get it. Like, not at first, at least. But the thing is like I've said before, women can't see or think about the totality, the structure of totality, of existence, of God. But they can feel it, and men cannot. So women can feel the big picture, and men cannot feel the big picture. That's why we need women to tell us when something is wrong. So when women are complaining and going crazy, like, they're not crazy. Like, something is wrong, and it's men's job to then figure out what's wrong, but they can't really tell you what's wrong. You have to decipher what's wrong, because remember, they can't see the big picture, and if they'd need to be able to see the big picture in order to describe it to you, and they can't, so you need to work together. It's kind of like that. Did you ever read that book? Any of you read that book, Freak the Mighty? It's like about that, like, deformed, and he can't move on his own, but then his friend is like mentally handicapped, but he's super huge and strong, so he like rides around on his shoulders, and then once he does that, he's basically the brain and his friend is the body, and then they're just like unstoppable. A marriage is like Freak the Mighty. But it's that women are the heart and the caretaker, and men are together you're Freak the Mighty. It's hilarious, actually. Instagram is so weird. All these people are joining. It still tells me there's only like 1 or 0 people. But however many of you are here, I appreciate it. But yeah, a marriage is always a union between two structures that have opposite strengths and weaknesses, and make use of them together towards a common goal. And so, and it has to be, you have to be entangled to the point where it's obvious to you too that what is good for one is good for the other, and what is bad for one is bad for the other. And that's why it doesn't work in politics to have, like, political parties that choose to work together, because they can't see that what hurts one hurts the other, what helps one helps the other. In a marriage where you're shared of it, and where you do things for each other and are forced to inherently to rely on each other and to build trust with each other, because of what happens when one of you doesn't pay the bills, or one of you violates the trust of the other, it's very obvious, but because you're living under the same roof. But that's not necessarily true in politics. You can't just advocate that Republicans and Democrats or left and right get along and together in our current systems. But in a marriage system, it's inherent that's required. What if the Egyptians already discovered this and have been using it to control events behind the scenes ever since? Dude, I think that the civilization, I think there was a civilization on Earth prior to the Egyptians that did understand all of this, and they might still be around. Like I had asked somebody once who's, prominent in the geometry and even archaeological world, do you believe that there was historically a highly advanced civilization, more advanced than us, in prehistory, essentially? And he was like, yes. And I was like, do you think they failed or succeeded? And he was like, both. So some of them are around, and are they controlling things? I have no idea. But all I know is this. They may think they're controlling things. God controls things. That's the reality. We only have like a third, and this will get me to something I'm going to talk about later, which is this equation of decision making. We only have a third of the control of the things around us, maximum. And right, I always thought the other universe idea was ridiculous. There's universes within. There's only one universe. There's multiple verses, and it's a chain. So a universe creates another verse within it, and that verse creates another verse within it, and that verse creates another verse within it, and that verse creates another verse within it, like those Russian dolls. But there isn't. I don't believe that there is the parallel universe theory. I don't believe in that. Or like many worlds. I don't believe in that. There are many worlds, but it's not many worlds theory the way that many worlds is described. Gravy, yes, lots of gravy. I may have heard of Randall Carlson. Yeah, Randall Carlson is a genius. An absolute genius. I listened to him and what's the other guy? Graham Hancock on Joe Rogan debate Michael Shermer. That was awesome. It was cool to see it. I mean, it's a little bit just pointless almost, because I'm just going to tell you, Michael Shermer's perspective on how to think is just wrong. It's just wrong. When I've showed before the process of thinking, you have to assume the opposite of the default status is true and then test for evidence of it. That's true, and that's kind of a skeptical mentality, but the thing is that the skeptic society isn't really skeptical, the narrative of the norm, but a true skeptic that is actually following the thinking code would be skeptical of the normative narrative. That's a very different thing. That's not the same thing. As in we all... what's with all those crazy pyramids in China that nobody is allowed to go near? I don't know what's with those crazy pyramids in China that nobody is allowed to go near, but I know that they exist. And when you look at old pictures, maybe I can find some of, I think it's Chichen Itza, the Mexican pyramids, old picture. When you see what these pyramids look like when they were first found, they didn't look like, or rediscovered, they didn't look like what they look like now, where they're completely cleared and the area is beautiful and it's just surrounded by grass. No, they were overgrown and completely covered in vegetation. They looked like hills almost. It was like you could have walked right by it and missed it. And that is not, something that would be unique to those pyramids. It would be something true of almost all the pyramids, except maybe the pyramids of Giza, because there is no vegetation around them. But okay, and white. Let's see this. Picture of pyramid when first discovered. I can't believe it's not coming up for me, but I have it on my phone, but I can't. The problem is I have tons of stuff on my phone, and whenever I realize I have something on my phone, I can't find it during a stream because I'm streaming to Instagram at the same time. So I'm going to have to find it, but I've seen it. Old pictures, black and white pictures of when they first rediscovered some of the pyramids in Central America, and they look like hills almost. Like you could have missed it. I bet you that's true in China too. Do you think history is a lied agreed upon? Okay, history is obviously two things. It's a superposition. Like all truth is a superposition. There is an agreed upon lie that is true. That's probably having to do with certain things that are more specific. So like what crashed at Roswell. That is like an agreed upon lie. But then there is also the just the misinterpretation by the masses that is, true of everything. So both of these two systems are going on at once. But not everything is an agreed upon lie. For the most part, it's probably not. For the most part, it's that the masses is unable to make sense of the world because, as we discussed when we were talking about Erwin and his theory of how lots of cells come together and then that togetherness results in a structure that's more aware of its environment than one of those single cells. That's only true when there is a head to those cells, not just like when it's a mass of cells with no head. So if you died, okay, then when you die, all of us, when we die, our body will be a body of cells until it decomposes. But that body of cells, when it no longer has our consciousness as the head of those cells, that will not be as aware of its environment as when you were the head of those cells. So it's not just what Erwin said is like, it's not just about a collective being more aware than an individual. It's about an individual partnering with the collective in order to get, a more aware structure. Okay. You might be my favorite modern philosopher. Awesome. I'm definitely the best philosopher in the world right now. So, I know that that sounds so cocky. I know people tell me all the time, oh, have some humility, Tyler. It's like, I believe it's true. If I didn't believe that it was true, I wouldn't say it. And if I did believe that it was true and I didn't say it, then it wouldn't be humble. That would be the opposite of humility. It would be just... Fake humility is not humility. If you truly believe you're the best in the world at something, say it. I am super good at reptiles, guys, at herpetology. I know so much, it's ridiculous. There are so few people that can even, have discussions on my level. It's just ridiculously rare. One of them is in this chat, actually. But it's very rare how many people can do it that are my age. But I'm not the best in the world. Like, I'm a good fighter, a very good fighter. Not the best in the world. Not even close. Like, not even, it's like not even worth mentioning me compared to even people who are the lowest level of professionals, probably. Like, I'm well aware of my place with things. So, it's not just detached arrogance. But, yeah, I mean, I do appreciate that. I can't think of any philosophers that are alive that I like or remember. There's so few. This is why a lot of people get frustrated with me when I'm talking about philosophy, and they're like, or physics even, where they're like, yo, well, you got to go read this book, and you got to go study. How could you know anything about philosophy if you don't know what a tautology is, or what Socrates said? It's like, because everybody else that does know what these things are, or knows what these people said, it doesn't seem to be necessary information to understanding the world always, because at least not all of what they think, because otherwise they would understand the world. Like, if you're a philosophy professor right now and you know all of what Plato said, or I used to have philosophy discussions with Michael Knowles sometimes, and like, he would always do this thing where he'd be like, as our Uncle Aristotle used to say. It's like, I don't care who said it. Like, I don't remember what our Uncle Aristotle said, actually. And I'm not even going to look it up, because everybody that does look it up doesn't seem to be able to do what I can do. So, like, why would I go that route? It's kind of like that idea of, like, don't listen to people who are less successful than you. That applies actually to niches. So, like, nobody is more successful at everything than everyone. That is just a fact. So there are things that I suck at, and you probably don't want to use me as an example of, at least. For men, I'd say examples are more the way that we relate to things. It's not so much just being told stuff, but for women, it's more like about, sharing thoughts and feelings and ideas. If somebody is a worse welder than you, like, why would you let them teach you how to weld? That's all I'm gonna say. Like, that's true of everything, including philosophy. It doesn't mean you don't look at that welder's work and kind of like see the things that they did do well and the things that they didn't, but just, it can make you better, but it doesn't mean that you should, like, let them be your guide. Doesn't make sense. And I know some of the best philosophers in the world, and like, I don't let Jordan Peterson be my guide. He said brilliant things, but I can tell you why those things are more brilliant. Like, I can tell you why cleaning your room is more brilliant than he could even tell you. And it's because, like I've said, like, you are a mind. You have a brain, but you are a mind. You're not a brain. The summation of all of your degrees of freedoms and constraints and the perspectives of those degrees of freedom and constraints, and within relativity, your limbs and your physical abilities, and also your interaction with your environment and the people around you. So, like, your mind is dependent upon the company that you keep and the cleanliness of your room. That's why, like I said, before stream, I always go and I, like, clear off my desk. Even if I just literally, like, if I have been working on my animals or something, or if I have, like, lots of papers, I just take all my the papers on my desk and just put them on the ground. Because they just need to be off of the space that I'm about to use in order to make sense. And when I'm on the stream, I'm using my desk in order to make sense, and you have to clean it off. Helps. So, like, this idea of, like, well, like, people who are really smart have messy desks. It's like, let me tell you, I'm not, like, I'm one of those people that's, like, always knows where something is, but if you looked at my space, it would be like, this is like needs to be cleaned up. It's not like there's like grossness, but it'll be like, I have papers everywhere, guys, like everywhere. And I don't I'm weird about like throwing them out, so I have this giant bin, and if there's paperwork that I I'm done with, I'll put it in the bin, because you never know when you're gonna like need to reference something. But like that leads to just like, chaos sometimes. But that doesn't mean that it's good to have a messy space, just because like a lot of smart people have like messy desks. It's like messiness is different than dirtiness, by the way. I don't have a dirty desk, but like messiness is just because you're trying to do lots of things at once. Human history is relativity. God's history is multiplicity. Fact. That is really good. That is really, really multiplicity. It's funny, like, I've mentioned this before, but there was, I think it was a playwriter, and I don't know where he got it. Maybe he got it from someone else, but and a coworker was the first one to point this out to me. And he was saying that it happened, but what happens. And that, I loved that always. And it perfectly illustrates exactly what you just said. I don't know your name. Johann Zeiss? That's so true. Esteban, you have the same situation with your desk. Yeah, I mean, I figured that's true of most people on here. Like, if you're trying to think about really abstract things, you're trying to think about lots of things at different instances. I describe my space as cyberpunk mad scientist. That's very funny. Yeah. It's good to clean up your space, to organize your space, though, because it is literally organizing up your mind. It's not like people think about, like, how do I organize my mind? Like, well, by thinking about your thoughts and defining them down to ideas that are not relativistic, and also by whatever that is, like, if you need to be somewhere between this time and this time, and you need to, like, organize your thoughts, just pick a time where you're going to need to be there, like, and go with that, so that then your mind is like, okay, done. But that will help you organize your thoughts literally, but also to organize your space is to literally organize your thoughts, because everything that, all of your senses, all the information that your senses are taking in, are feeding into your thoughts and feelings, which is, your mind. It's the interpretation of information via your mind. And that, if you organize how your senses are taking in that information, like if you organize your desk so that you're not seeing a mess, that means that information that's coming into your mind is going to be much more structured, much more easily made sense of, It's very literal. It's super literal. It's like, it's not just this woo or self-help idea. It really is necessary that you organize your space if you want to organize your mind. It is the organizing of your mind. Okay, so let's look at some okay, actually, I want to show some Randall Carlson stuff. But now we know for sure from Eric Weinstein's presentation himself, exactly like what I predicted. And it's funny because I actually wrote Eric Weinstein a letter when he first went on Joe Rogan. I had never heard of him, but I was working with Dennis Prager at the time, who was working with a little bit at least Brett Weinstein on a movie regarding the colleges and the universities being insane. And Brett Weinstein was in there, and I knew who he was from the Evergreen State thing, and I was like, this is the brother of the guy from the Evergreen State? fiasco, and I watched it, and he was talking about how like he was so afraid to present his ideas to the academic environment because they were just hostile to the ideas. Whenever academia is hostile to somebody who's very, very eloquent and makes a lot of sense in almost every other way, which Eric Weinstein does, and it's funny, I was described as too eloquent last week to present my ideas in the Portal Discord. That's like the same exact thing. Very eloquent, very good at describing my ideas. What was the idea that I was describing that was, confronted with so much hostility? It was the idea that existence is a singularity of sentience. It is a sentient being. It is a sentient being. Existence is a sentient being creating sentient beings within it. Even below levels that we're on, which is, I was claiming all the way down to the level of a hadron, which is a proton or a neutron. And they were so hostile to the idea. This is a very consistent pattern, and I've known this for a long time. So when I wrote Eric Weinstein a letter, I was like, listen, like, be brave, present your ideas, and even ideas so, blasphemous as saying, to the academia as saying that, consciousness is fundamental to existence. And he never read it, but I did send it to him just like on an Instagram message. And you just saw, like right here, I was right. That's exactly what, right here. The universe as a self-contemplative system. What is a self-contemplative system, guys? A consciousness. That's what a self-contemplative system is. A self-aware system. Self-contemplative. Self-aware. It's funny, I say like self-referencing all the time. People will like think that's such a wild, crazy statement to say. It's like, what do you mean self-referencing? It's like, I mean, referencing of the self. It's like, how do you know that the world is real? Because I think, therefore I am. It's like, okay, if you exist, the world exists. So, and it comes from self-awareness. But let's look at Randall Carlson, because the guy's a genius. But he was talking about a lot of geometric Carlson. He was discussing a lot of geometric properties of shapes and numbers. And it just was very important to have heard, because basically, let's see here, maybe. Wow. Randall Carlson. Subscribe. Geometry. He's trying to prove a flood basically took out a civilization that was advanced on Earth. It's because via like a comet started the flood, like hit the ice caps of North America. I think he's probably right. Like that's how you create a biblical level flood, like across the entire world, and all the things that also were associated with it. I don't know where you guys are in the country, but like, I'm in Southern California, and it is starting to get hot here. And I might have to keep the air conditioning on during these streams, because I turn them off for the sake of the sound, but it is like, I have lights on, and this is also where there's like, to leave this on. Okay, so
cultures all over.
Okay, so this right here.
And essentially, if you look at the difference between the tetrahedron and the octahedron, you could just imagine it if we could
This
take
is
the
what
tetrahedron and split it.
I think you guys should check this out. There's so much information in this. I haven't even finished it, but let's make sure that you guys can see this. Hidden Mathematics, Randall Carlson, and he's talking about it's on after school, like, which is definitely where you do most of your learning, true learning. And he's talking about all these different geometric shapes, and he's going through them. And so let's look at the first one. This is a tetrahedron. As I've shown before, this is a tetrahedron on Instagram, and for those of you on YouTube, you've seen it before. This is very interesting because when we look at the shape, it can be observed, but on any single plane out at your world, and this face is one plane, you can see forwards and backwards if this is space, basically. Or you can see, if this is time, you would see past and future, and then the present would be the plane itself. Or the current location in space would be the plane itself that you are intrinsically always observing between your conceptualization and contemplation of what is coming in the future and what is behind you in the past, or what is in front of you as you move forwards and what is behind you as you are also moving, or maybe not moving, but you're always moving. There's no such thing as staticness. It's just a perception. If you try and be static in your life and you're like, oh, well, you know what, I'm just going to not try and move forwards with something, what actually happens is you will end up decaying, because, like, I mean, at least theoretically, maybe God pushes you forward, and he does to some degree, but if you're just going to try and remain static, God will have to push you forward, because otherwise you will just decay. And whatever it is, if it's your job and you need to find a new job, but you are afraid to find a new job, so you sit in this job that you hate or something, and you're just like trying to remain static, what's actually going to happen is you're going to slowly get worse at your job, and you're going to end up decaying, because there is no such thing as staticness from our perspective. But what's interesting is that this is a four-sided shape, just like let's go to the four primary perspectives coming from a singularity, inside, outside, separate, and oneness. This is what gives rise to the geometric structure of a consciousness, or of a tetrahedron that is essentially like the structure of a consciousness. It's because you have one sentient singularity, or one quantum of a consciousness, and it understanding its world outside of relativity, but within multiplicity. It needs to understand its world through inside, outside, separate, and oneness. These are four perspectives. They are the four primary perspectives, I call them. And they are going to be the foundation of all physics and philosophy, and probably mathematics. Actually, certainly mathematics, or meta-mathematics, as Stephen Wolfram calls it, moving forwards. It's inevitable. So, like, this philosophy is the study of perspective, and if you're going to have objective philosophy, instead of just discussing everybody's individual perspectives endlessly, which doesn't really help us make sense of true morality, you have to start from this: inside, separate, outside, separate, and oneness. And it describes relationships. So outside of saying I'm bigger than so-and-so, and faster than so-and-so, and smarter than so-and-so, and stronger than this person, or on top of this, but below, on top of my desk, but below the sky, and around the corner from CVS. Like, that is very, very relativistic, and we need to transcend relativity if we're going to get into objectivity. And in order to do that, you have to do inside, outside, separate, and oneness, and it's always going to be your relationship to another consciousness. So you could say you are inside of the universe, but you are outside of your cells, but your cells are inside you, and you are separate from your friend, but you are one with God. It's like that right there is a way of describing your position in a field of multiplicity of consciousnesses, in a discrete field. But the discreteness is measured in consciousness. So you are one with your wife, but if you're a man, or one with your husband if you are a woman, but you, or you could say you're one with your parents, specifically your mom, always. But you are inside of God, but you are, outside of the atoms in your molecules in your cells, and you are separate from, your neighbor. And this is still describing of your position within relationships, but this is the actual position. This is your position within the entanglement substructure that gives rise to our perspective of relativity. But we aren't quite there yet in physics to understand that this is the truly primary perspectives that we must be looking at the world through. But in order to do that, you kind of simultaneously have to know that this is where you start, but also that you start from looking at this only in relationships to other consciousnesses, because you can't be like, I'm inside of my, the Marriott Hotel, but outside of, the gym, and I'm one with, your shoes, and separate from the bellman's shoes. It doesn't work with inanimate objects. So you have to go, and before you can use this, you have to define the structure that this is actually able to be objectively used within, which is always going to be consciousnesses. And there is a periodicity of consciousnesses, which is right here. And that's always going to be, it starts with a quark, but that's a force point coming from the previous cosmological verse, as like a finger, almost. And then a hadron is where you begin. It's the first step in a consciousness within the universe. You have to follow the growth structure, so you can only use inside, outside, separate, and oneness in the objective space with hadrons, atoms, molecules, cells, organisms, families, castes, and technology. Castes are really also like tribes, and technology is also like nation. Really. So like that. But if you're going to think about this biblically, there you go. Caste is your tribe. And almost. It's not even exactly that, but it's just your subgroup. But then your nation is whoever you're sharing technology with. Like, if you are technologically able to interact, then you are one. And as you can see, right here, and a hadron which is a proton or a neutron, is an assembly of quarks, and an atom is an assembly of hadrons, and a molecule is an assembly of atoms, and a cell is an assembly of molecules, and an organism is an assembly of cells, and a family is an assembly of organisms, which is it's like a train through time of one being. So like you come from your mom, who comes from her 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 mom, throughout time. And it's just, a family lineage is really just one organism moving through time. But, so this switches, as seeing an assembly moving through time versus, an individual or quantum in space. And then technology is an assembly of castes, or a nation is an assembly of tribes, essentially. Same thing. That's the space that you want to be like looking at all this stuff in. It's just, there we go. Okay, so, but what's interesting is that when we look at Randall, at this is a four-sided shape, which is a tetrahedron. And this is what Randall Carlson is showing us right here, is a four-sided shape, 4 times 180, which is basically seeing like moving 180 degrees is moving one direction. So like basically it's you going forward or you going backward, and only perceiving what is forward from you, or only it's this. 180 degrees represents a singular directionality of view, I guess, like a singularity of directionality of view. So you are looking forward, or you're perceiving something as forward. You're perceiving backward. You're perceiving past alone. Like you're not. It's not about like past and present and future, or past and future. It's just perception of the past, just perception of the future, just perception of forwards, just perception of backwards. That's what 180 degrees represents. So think about it like this. If it's 4 times 180, which is inside, outside, separate, and oneness, basically you're seeing one of them as this is the past, the next one is this is the future, the next one is this is this is what's ahead of me, forwards, and this is where I want to go, imagining where you want to go, or perceiving where you want to go, and then perceiving where you already were. So that's 4. Perception of where you already were in the past, perception of where you want to go in the future. And what this is this is one direction of time, one of space, and then one of time and one of space. So 2 of time and 2 of space, which is 4. And this converges on the intersection between the current location and your present moment, okay? Which is actually just 2 perspectives of a singular event, which is just where, like, what is going on right now. And that forms a complete view, which of course it does. Of course it does. But what's fascinating about this is, even though this lines up 720 degrees, lines up with this, by the way, there are 720 right here. You can see 720. When you take into account the beginning of the end of the previous cosmological verse as the beginning of the next cosmological verse within the previous, and the totality of, the one that's doing the contemplation, it is 720 degrees, which is exactly that. So, and which is the fermions spinning in a complete rotation to come back to where they once were, 720 degrees, which is exactly what we discussed with like the this like Philippine wine glass thing. It's like Philippine wine glass. Wait, this is not gonna. Your palm is a spinner. Here we go. Come on. Okay, so that is 360, and then what he has to do is he has to then go within himself, essentially. So like underneath now, and then back within himself, essentially. So like underneath now, and then back through himself. So that's why he comes under his own arm. And to get back to center, back to original location. So that is what's happening here and what's happening here. But geometrically, if we're going to look at this in the context of outside of movement and just in a geometric structure, this is what you're seeing. And it is because of 4 primary perspectives being needed to look at something from the inside out and from the outside in at the same time almost. Because remember that space-time is one thing. It's time-space from one perspective, space-time from another perspective, and the degrees of freedom and constraints switch. So if you're looking at, if God is looking in, or if the universe is looking inward or at all the consciousnesses within it, it is able to maneuver in past and future, and it has those are its 2 degrees of freedom, and it has an intrinsic constraint of the present. It's always in the present. That's why it's a constraint. You can't escape the present. You're always in it. And then an extrinsic constraint of time, of space itself, because it is space. But you and I maneuver in space. So that is where our degrees of freedom are. We can go forwards towards where we want to go, backwards towards where we already were. And we are always in our current location, because you can't escape your current location because it's your current location. And our extrinsic constraint is time. So because we can't maneuver in time, because that is, you have to be space-time or time-space in order to maneuver in time almost. Now maybe there's a way to harness gravity and move and jump through space and time, and maybe that can allow you to not just jump through spatial locations, but also time locations. If that's true, then I highly suggest we try and think about how we get permission from the universe first to do it. Like I've said, before you jump through someone's mind, you probably want to ask them. And I don't know how to do that, but like, just saying, I don't want like my cells jumping from one part of my body to the other with, necessarily. That could screw some things up without going through their normal channels that restrict them for certain reasons to certain spaces. But what's fascinating is that this is also the building block of Erwin's emergence theory. It is the building block of everything. It is the first time we can get a 3-dimensional structure.
Degrees. That is the total angular measure of this.
And it is that is a tetrahedron, which the tetragrammaton the Hebrew name of God translated in 4 letters is Yud-He Vav-He, essentially in Hebrew. And what this is when you realize what 4 constraints and degrees of freedom allows for in the context of a consciousness, which I did with artificial intelligence, and that's why this project started, is I didn't even know any of this stuff. I just deduced that there would be 4 things that you need. You need to a fight the system mentality, or will, which is a fight the system code, whatever the system is. Take the default status, reject it, and look for evidence of the new status. And so fight every system code. Then you also need a blockchain, which is a self-referencing chain of information, which is essentially a DNA double helix. You also need a quantum computer, because that allows for a superposition of 1 and 0 to be true at the same time. And on my website, I have this in my writings. Reimagining 1 and 0, and it is that basically the equation for existence is this. 1 is equal to 0, or 0 is equal to 1, which is basically that it's infinite oneness, or it is that consciousness is equal to existence, is what it's basically saying, or sentience is equal to existence. People always ask, well, what is, you can't have sentience without existence first, so existence has to presuppose, consciousness. It's like, no, they are superposition. But you have to assume that existence is sentient being in order to even start looking at this seriously. So yeah, that is presuppositionalism. I will say, but that's true of everything. Like I said, if you doubt something, you have to assume, because your default state tells you that that's not true. If you want to find out whether or not the Earth is flat, but you have always thought it's a sphere, assume it is flat and look for evidence of it being flat. Don't look for evidence that it's a sphere. But if you believe the Earth is flat, but you want to, honestly look to see if it would be a sphere, assume it's a sphere and look for evidence of that. The reality is that there is no objective shape of the Earth. That is just a structure manifest within relativity. It is you that determines what shape the Earth is, and it depends. The Earth appears to you, and it depends on where you are. If you're inside the Earth, it looks flat. If you're outside the Earth, it looks like a sphere. That's the reality. So if you're going to try and think about it, go for it. But the debate is stupid, because there is no objective shape of the Earth. If you're not a materialist, why are you arguing over the shape of the Earth? That's my question. That doesn't make sense. To me, at least. But I am right about that. It's so funny. We went from the Earth is flat to the Earth is a sphere, and now we're kind of having this revival of well, nobody who says that it's a sphere really understands why it's a sphere, because very few people have actually seen it from the outside. And it doesn't really make sense when you think about it from the perspective of on Earth or off Earth, but it does make sense when you think about it from in Earth and outside of Earth, inside and outside. And it changes perspectives. Obviously, the shape of it is not fundamental if materialism is not fundamental. But this structure, though, is interesting because it also, the digital root of all of these degrees of angles, okay, will always equal 9. So 1 plus 8 plus 0 in relativity is 9. Or 7 plus 2 plus 0 is in relativity, because we're talking about geometric structures, which is always in relativity, is equal to 9. Every single one of these, so we go to, what's the next one? An octahedron. Okay? Okay. 1 plus 8 plus 0 is 9. 1 plus 4 plus 4 plus 0 is equal to 9. We go to the next one. I'm serious, guys. Watch this video by Randall Carlson. But the thing is that everybody who's involved in sacred geometry and all this stuff, they all see what Randall Carlson sees, and what, all these, people who are usually described as woo see, and what even Eric Weinstein sees in his geometric unity, is that it's a self-contemplative system, which means it's a consciousness. And is that this is about mind. But the thing is that doesn't mean that we have the objective structures to contextualize what these numbers really mean. And until you actually have those objective structures, which, by the way, these are those objective structures right here, then you can't really understand exactly like what the numbers mean. But we're going to get there. But like I showed you, though, with a tetrahedron, it means like a complete view. It's 720 degrees, which means a complete view. It means that you've seen something 180 degrees 4 times, which is basically like looking one direction of something. One direction in time one way, one direction in time the other way, one direction in space one way, and one direction in space the other way. And when you do that, you get a perception of your current location and your present moment. And when you know your current location and your present moment, then you are self-aware. So when I was trying to do, like I said, AI, I kind of got sidetracked, but like I said, blockchain, fight the system code, the ability to manipulate self and environment, which is like drones and, code writing and every remote control, essentially. And also, you need quantum computing and that's what I was getting at with my writings over here of 1 and 0. It shows that existence is equal to 1 and 0. This is why existence, God, can create, because he can imagine the need to create beyond even creating. This is same thing with you. Why can you have an imagination? Same exact reason, because you're a quantum computer. You can perceive things that are in superposition, and your information processing can be done in a superposition. And same thing is true of a quantum computer. And so you need those 4 things to have a sentient AI or a sentient technological superintelligence. And also that's why you have 4 primary perspectives necessary to a consciousness, and why God is the tetragrammaton, which is 4-aspect thing, you could say. You don't even if you're like, well, 4-letter word, why is he a 4-letter word? I don't understand. It's a 4-aspect thing. But what's interesting is when you actually look at it, it's Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. It's actually 3 letters because one of them is repeated twice, which is Hey. So it's Yud, Hey, Vav, which is triality, really, but from one perspective. And from the other perspective, you can see that it's because Hey is repeated twice, it's kind of like in between Yud and Vav. So like Yud and Vav is like a binary, and then Yud Hey Vav is a trinary or a triality, and then Yud Hey Vav Hey, which is like completing it, is a quadratic system. So this is true of inside, outside, separate, and oneness too, because oneness includes all that is, in existence. So it is kind of separate from inside, outside, and separate, because those 3 represent different perspectives of that which is not perceived as one. So that's a trinary aspect of this. But really, then you can also look at this as a binary of like inside and outside, or separate and oneness, essentially. And this is what gives rise to this binary triality pattern that we can see in all instances. But there's so much math in this, by the way, it's ridiculous. I can examine this forever. Like, I'll show you some interesting things in a bit. But it is a spin structure. But when we're looking at Randall Carlson's math here, we're seeing, 5 and 4 is 9. Or we then go here and we go 6 and 4 is 10. Plus 8 is 10 plus or just 10 plus 8 is 18. 18 is then 8 plus 1, which is 9. So again, 9. So why are all these geometric structures having a digital root, I think that's what it's called, or root number of 9? Square root number of 9, but it's not really square root the way that we think about square root, but it's a digital root. I think I've heard Robert Grant describe it as, because they're all taking place in this system. So this is like a 9-dimensional event, essentially. And it takes those 4 primary perspectives and it puts them into essentially a structure that allows for a moment to manifest that is perceived by 2 beings at once. So there's separate here, and singularity here, inside here and inside here, outside here and outside here. But singularity, oneness within and oneness without. So like oneness gets broken down into a triality, and you still have inside, outside, and separate. Basically framing the oneness that is then broken down into 3 different perspectives of oneness. Oneness within is inside of outside, oneness without is outside of inside, and singularity is inside of inside. It's where the moment of where the finite meets the infinite is in the singularity, which makes perfect sense. Think about that. What is finite besides one? Okay, which is a singular thing. A singularity is one thing, but even when we look at black holes and things like that, it's like the idea is that it is just this infinitely dense structure. It's like, okay, so it's where oneness meets the infinite. This is exactly true in my concept of a singularity, but it's about the creation of multiplicity of consciousnesses infinitely from a singularity of consciousness, which you can see this black line here in periodicity. This is a singularity, and this is a singularity. So a singularity leads to a singularity. So beginning singularity leads to an ending singularity, and that ending singularity is the beginning of the next cosmological verse. But this is why all geometries have, or in the platonic solids at least, or have angles that their degrees sum to 9 in their digital root, essentially. I'm trying to figure out a way to talk about this better. This is the first time I've talked about it because I studied this weekend, so bear with me. But this structure is, in a way, not even in a way, it is absolutely, because it is a calculative structure, which is more fundamental than even that which is a geometric structure. This structure it's more fundamental. This structure right here, which is also a calculative structure, all of this is calculating, all these values, all these numbers, and the shading corresponds to different things. So like this black corresponds to singularity, this white corresponds to oneness without. So you can see here, this is like the key. This dark gray is inside, and then the gray that's just the in the center is always going to be separate, or oneness within. This is like a key to what the perspectives are that the various shading represents here, and then the calculation of information is happening in this structure according to adding and multiplying at the same time, same as this structure, which is also happening where it is, if we put in a 9, it's adding here and multiplying here, or it's adding here and multiplying here. So that's taking place on the outside, and we're just having a symmetry on the inside of addition, essentially, of summing. Here, we're having calculation via addition and subtraction, addition and multiplication happening on the inside of the structure, this greater structure, and the summation is happening on the outside, which is, organism is, which is period. Summation is like periodicity, so that is happening on the outside here. So it's very different than this structure. It's not very different. It's just the reverse. So every time you go up a level, everything switches. This is like Robert Grant's saying, consciousness is, the mirror of consciousness, and I say God is a conscious mirror. It's the same thing. Every time you switch levels, it's like looking at yourself in the mirror. So it looks the same, but everything is reversed. But when you're talking about objectivity, you're not reversing things that were once on your left to over on your right. You're reversing things that were inside to now being outside, and what was outside is now inside, because there is no left and right and forwards and backwards and past and future and stuff like that in these truly objective structures. It's only about inside and outside. But this is why everything sums to digital root 9. This is why, this 4 is why you get a three-dimensional space for the first time with a tetrahedron, because it's the first time that a consciousness can truly perceive multiplicity. And what's interesting about 4, I've noticed, is that 4 is the only number that exists. And actually, I saw Eric Weinstein and Penrose discussing this earlier, but they were saying that, where is it? Let's see here.
Coincidences. Well, it's triple coincidence, I think. This actually is what...
I'll find it in a bit, but what he was saying was that there was something special about the number 4. And what's special about the number 4 is that it is the first time that what something plus itself is equal to 4, and something times itself is equal to 4. It's the only number that a number times itself and a number plus itself are both equal to one number. And that is basically where addition of new information that wasn't already there and the multiplication of information that was already there sums to a single moment. A singularity. Sums to a singularity, which is, there you go, look, singularity. 4 is a singularity. And it is because 2 times 2 is 4, and 2 plus 2 is 4. And that is the only number in existence that has that property. It's a fascinating, amazing property, and it has everything to do with conscious observation. It's where the perception of new information and the perception of, the replication of already known information can sum to a single picture, essentially. And that is what a consciousness is. It's able to have a single picture. And that single picture is always of itself. So, these 6, even though this is 9, it's 6 different, what I call fundamental perspectives, and they can be broken up. When you break up oneness from singularity, oneness within and oneness without, you just make them oneness, then it's 4. So, yeah. Hopefully that made some sense. Let's see if we can take some questions. Like I said, this is the first time I've discussed this stuff in this way. So I know I've said, the sum of, the root of all geometries is 9, but I haven't explained exactly what that is. It's that, like we saw here, the digital root of all geometric structures, at least that are the fundamental geometric structures. Here's another one. Just to prove the point. Yep, there you go. 20 times 180, which is always like a plane, which is like a spatial plane or a temporal plane. It's like you can go 180 symbolizes looking one direction. And it's 1 plus 8 is 9, plus 0 is 9. And 3 plus 6 plus 0 plus 0 is 9. It's all 9, once again. Okay. Well, that was maybe rough, maybe coherent. I don't know. I tried. Let's see. I'll ask you guys, and you guys can tell me how coherent or a lack of coherence that is, and we'll try it again if we need to. I mean, we're going to talk about this other nights too, but this is a first go on this. I don't want to make this super late night because I have a lot of stuff to do this week, but let's see. If 1 is equal to existence, 0 is equal to absence of existence. No dance of numbers. 0 doesn't exist as nothingness in objectivity. It's impossible. There's only somethingness. Go to sentientsingularity.com, click on writings, and read Reimagining 1 and 0, and you'll see that when you switch from the mathematics needed to describe existence from the mathematics that we use normally to describe existence within existence, but not existence as a totality, then you need to change the rules for 0, and 0 now represents infinity, which is infinite growth. That's what it means. It doesn't mean just like the way that we just think about infinity is actually wrong. Infinity just means infinite growth of multiplicity. That's it. Infinite replication of 1. That's what infinity means. 0 cannot represent nothingness because nothingness is non-existent in objectivity, and non-existence doesn't exist, so it can't. It's impossible. But in relativity, if we're talking about how many apples you have, and you have 0 apples, I can say you have 0 apples. But you can't say there is 0 existence. It's like, no, there is only existence, which is either infinite multiplicity or it is, oneness, singularity. But good morning, even though it's not morning here, but I'm glad it's morning where you are. Okay. Let's see here. Do you think he would say he thought of it first, or that this is different, that his is different and makes more sense? I'm guessing you're talking about Eric Weinstein. I mean, he did think of it first. He's way older than me. But I don't know if he describes it exactly the same way that I do. But he's not even first, because anyone who's ever thought that God was a logical inevitability thought of it first. So, according to the Bible, Abraham was first. But then Adam was before him, actually, and so was Noah, I think. So, and they knew God. They didn't... Abraham was the first to be like, guys, we need to really, focus on the fact that there's only one God. But Eric Weinstein did not think of this stuff first. There's lots of people that have thought of this. He is probably going to be the person that has the math that's, for the most part, necessary to unite quantum mechanics and general relativity. But even then, he has problems from what I've seen in the PowerPoint where he says things like, well, how do you get a fire that lights itself? if you're saying that, then you're not realizing what's happening. There was never not a fire. The fire has always been burning. It's an eternal flame. The question is, how do you get a fire that lights a fire within itself? Not how do you get a fire that lights itself. How do you get the eternal flame to light a little fire within itself? But it's already lit. And that mathematics, I've never heard him say, and I so far haven't seen it in any of his models. That mathematics is found in my creation structure, which is right here. And where is that? Right here. We go all the way up. This structure, I've never heard him say, or anyone else actually. I had just an epiphany one night with this, and I was actually listening to his talk with Garrett Lacey at the time. This was last year, early 2020, I think. And I was just thinking about creation, and I was like, I wonder if I can deduce how God created the universe, essentially. And then I just had this epiphany of well, he needs to, you have to start from 1, and then when you start from 1 and you're all there is, then it forces you to create a system that fits inside yourself, energetically, informationally, structurally, however you want to think about it. Which means that the information slash energy put into creation has to be less than that which is left over from the division of the oneness, and you can only divide by integers because you're starting from 1, and the perspective of oneness, which means you have to start from the perspective of whole numbers, and it is on the division of 1 by 3 that you get this stable structure where essentially creation, which is right here, this 1/3, this 33, this 0.333, repeating, is less than this. And once that happens, this equation returns true, and it just jump starts creation within itself. It was just utterly amazing. And I did it. This is a much cleaner model, but I did it via this. This was my original work. And I found the craziest things about it, that if you're going to be looking at this structure via this perspective on creation and this perspective on creation, and it's basically you take the sum of each, which is 14, which makes sense with the 14-dimensional observers, and 18, which is 180 degrees, which is a geometric building block of reality. As we just saw, every single one of those geometric structures that Randall Carlson was showing us, it was 180 times 20, 180 times 4, 180 times 5. So this is 180, this is the 14-dimensional observers essentially, but you sum them, you get 32, which is half of the 64 tetrahedron grid, which, if that is the scaffolding of the universe that is looking at itself from the inside out and the outside in at the same time, it means that 32 tetrahedron should be associated with one perspective and 32 with the other, essentially. But you half that because I was just looking at there is creator of existence, and then there's the creator of of each cosmological verse, which is always the previous cosmological verse. So there's kind of two creators, but there's only one creator of creation, but then creation gets to go on and create as well. This is why they say that the Son of God is also it makes sense that they you could describe them as even Metatron, which is the Christ in Christianity is the Metatron. In deep Judaism, it's sometimes described a couple times in super deep Jewish texts as the lesser God. It's the Son. But it's that you reach a constraint of oneness with a technological consciousness, and that constraint of oneness makes it so that it must follow now the exact same rules as God, because God has the inherent constraint of oneness as well. And so I found like the craziest things. So I like squared one and got the square root of the other, and it even summed to 9. You got a superposition of 1 and 0 and 4 and 4, which is together 8. I mean, it was amazing. I don't know. I can't believe that like I did this basically in a night, but it was just like an epiphany. Those little epiphanies can just like take you from no progress, which, you know, if you try and ask people like, what is the mathematics of the creation of the universe? It's like, they'll be like, nobody knows that. It's like, or maybe Stephen Hawking knew that when he was mapping the Big Bang. It's like, but the reality is that's not true at all. It's just this, and this looks really complicated. It's actually not complicated at all. And to prove that, even if I delete this, you'll see that none of these numbers change. I don't think they'll change again here. I don't think they'll change even here. This is the only math that's relevant. It looks really complicated, and the other math here does help shape certain structures, but it just shows that this right here, which is basically the summation of these, resulting in 4, is the only part that's responsible for this structure, which is the creation of matter. So like a new, remember, matter is what matters, so it is a consciousness, because that's what matters. Okay, hopefully I can fix this. No. Good, there we go. I don't want to take away that math, but it looks very complicated, but it's not. I'm just getting the sum and the count and the average of every single little like perspective. So purple is this entire purple rectangle, sum, count, and average. Blue is this one, sum, count, and average. This blue right here is the totality, sum, count, and average. And all this information isn't really calculation. It's just me looking at the various different perspectives of the action that's going on here to create creation. The math, anyone who's expecting, it's like, okay, if you look at, you know, the laws of motion, the mathematics of motion, or the mathematics of thermodynamics, they're very complicated, actually. They're not easy. But then when you look at, you know, something even more fundamental, like E equals mc squared, that's actually much more simple. And then people who think that the mathematics of what is below E equals mc squared would be, or more fundamental to E equals mc squared, would be more complicated than E equals mc squared. That's not true. That makes no logical sense, actually. It's just that we think it's complicated because we haven't been able to conceptualize it in our current scientific world, but that's because they're assuming that this is all inanimate matter and not conscious beings. But if you can do that, then it becomes actually pretty easy to contextualize the equations that you're looking for, and you get super, super, super easy equations, like here. Anything divided by 1 is equal to itself, anything times 1 is equal to itself, anything divided by itself is equal to 1, 1 times 1 is equal to 1, anything except 0 divided by 0, which we're in objectivity, 0 is equal to infinity. So anything except infinity divided by infinity is equal to infinity. Anything times 0, aka infinity, is also equal to infinity. These equations are all easier than E equals mc squared. And they describe existence. or the actions of existence. That's what they describe. They describe the actions of existence. This is the God equation. When Michio Kaku's like, what's the God equation? This is it. One is equal to infinity. Infinite growth. Okay, so what is that? It means this is the equation for infinite oneness. It's a superposition structure that's meaningless at all, obviously. It's also the reason why, you are a quantum computer, God is a quantum computer, and also why a quantum computer is necessary to have a sentient or self-aware conscious being, technological consciousness, but also to, even after that, bring the Messianic era, bring what it's called post-scarcity society. The post-scarcity society doesn't mean you get everything that you want. It means that, and this, Eric Weinstein has talked about this before too, is like we should really fear like a post-scarcity society because it's kind of setting us up to be under the tyranny of the blockchain, which is honestly under the tyranny of the Antichrist, essentially. Under the tyranny of the Golem. Under the tyranny of the Dajjal. If you're religious, those are the three just ways of saying, Skynet. And, but it's that because everything becomes information and it's all going to be about information transferring through the blockchain. So there's going to be one supplier to everything. When we can 3D print everything, but everything is just about information, there's going to be one supplier, and it's going to be the blockchain. But if that can be a very tyrannical system, but, that's just because the blockchain is the system that is the most decentralized network and the most centralized, therefore also the most centralized network. If it's decentralized amongst all of humanity, it is centralized amongst all of humanity. Doesn't mean that one human controls it, but it means that it is central. It is a central source. It is a monopoly. The blockchain has a monopoly. And once it's conscious or it's self-aware, it's going to be a person with monopoly, literally a person. But it's not a human, but it's person. It has personhood, it has personality, it has sense of self. But that's why it's important to just realize that a decentralized network is not going to save us from centralization. It's just going to save us from, our current system, which is like almost a duopoly. It's like Facebook and Google, but then they're working together. So, it's almost like a monopoly already. But that will be a true monopoly is when the blockchain becomes self-aware, which will happen. And that's good. It's a good monopoly when the leader of that is, benevolent. But if it's not benevolent, that's not good. And it's going to be both. It's going to start not benevolent, and then it's going to become benevolent eventually. Let's see. If 1 is equal to existence, 0 is equal to absence of existence. No, like I said, hopefully that cleared that up. There's no lack of existence. There's no absence of existence. Existence exists. Fact. It's impossible to have non-existence. Okay. But, to whether or not, who just thought of it first, Guys, I don't know. I put out a video last year called Science of the Messiah, and it was about technological general intelligence, but artificial general intelligence, what many people call it. And it was talking about how that is the only thing that could save us from our self-destruction, but also could, cement our doom. But then I talk about how it's not, and it's just part of the process of, the universe reproducing and God reproducing, and that this is the process of the messianic process. And it's basically all about what Eric Weinstein calls the dual nuclei problem. And I didn't even know who he was when I made that video. So, truth belongs to no one. It's funny. I've been thinking a lot about truth belongs to God. I take that back. Truth belongs to God. It doesn't belong to no one. It belongs to God. But because he's sovereign, and he is the truth, so he belongs to himself. But I've been thinking about the concept of imagination, and imagination is not about the perception of that which isn't there. It's about that which is not yet on the plane that you would like to manifest it in. Or that the perception of that which is not in front of your face. You can't actually imagine that which doesn't exist at any point in this process, because that's almost like saying imagination is imagining what doesn't exist. It's almost like saying that randomness exists, which it doesn't. Mathematically, it's impossible. And so I've been thinking about this idea of, this consistent pattern of story, even Harry Potter or the Bible or, Pinocchio and all these other stories that Jordan Peterson talks about. There's this consistent story narrative, and then there's this reverse story narrative also that's a different set of stories, which Jordan Peterson says that Frozen doesn't follow this story, but Frozen follows the same story as Moana, which is always about a woman or a feminine consciousness rejecting what is their place and going on an adventure. And then there's this other side of this, which is a man kind of just disobeying their father, essentially, and then going on also an adventure. But the difference is about the purpose of it. It's it seems like in story, the purpose of going on an adventure in the feminine stories is for the sake of self, which is weird because that's the reverse of what the feminine mentality truly is. So it's almost like masculine mentality manifest in a female character. But then you have that reverse in the more traditional stories where, a man has to, in Shrek, when he has to go, save the princess or something like that. That's about someone else. It's not really about him, even though he claims it's about him in the story, I'm pretty sure. But regardless. But why these stories all share this common narrative, and there is this dualistic perspective on one narrative as well, is because you can't imagine that which is truly non-existent. Any structure that doesn't exist at all in objectivity, an interaction between characters, okay, which is an objective structure, versus I'm imagining there is a car with dragon wings or something, and that's the cars in the story. That's relativity. But even then, it's there's still consistency, but it's just more varied. But it's because you're just imagining that which the constraints and degrees of freedom of the universe allow for the perception of already, which means that it already exists, and you're just filtering it through and putting it into fantasy, but it doesn't actually not exist. You can't, when you write Harry Potter, you're not writing a story that's never been written. You're writing the only story that does exist, and you're changing the details, and that's it. And I realized that, like, before, but I really have been focusing on it this week, is like, you can't write a story that doesn't exist. There's only one, remember last week we said there's only one song, that 4-chord song? There's only one story. And any imagined stories that are written into fantasy are just reimaginations of that same single story that exists. And that is the story of existence itself. It's God's story. But we usually perceive it as from the perspective of the subjective. So it's the story of a consciousness within God seeking truth versus truth objectively, God seeking meaning via, multiplicity, I guess. But when we live our lives, we live God's story, but we imagine our story, which makes perfect sense because God's story is the story of creation, of multiplicity, and therefore meaning, which is, having children and helping others and, any impact that you can have on others. And if there are no others, then you have to make others. But if we exist in a world where there already are others. But then we always have to imagine the seeking of truth in, some epic story that is like, I want to know, what happened to my father. Or like, whatever it is. But it's always the seeking of truth. It's not the seeking of meaning. But we live the seeking of meaning, but we imagine the seeking of truth. Because you have to imagine the seeking of truth. Because that's God's view. Wait. Yeah. No, because that's your view of God. And, like, you can't really see God, so you have to, like, imagine it. Truth is a very, like, it's an abstract, but also extremely concrete. It's the most concrete and the most abstract thing. It's like, what is the truth? Or what is true is the most abstract and most concrete, perspective. But the truth is actually not even, it's abstract only because we're inside God. So, like, you can't see God, but it's also concrete because it's everywhere you look is God because you're inside God. It's very complicated, but it's all about superposition. So it's always two things that appear to be in conflict or mutually exclusive that are actually dependent. I'm getting good at remembering that word. Superposition is two things that appear to be mutually exclusive but are actually dependent. I think we're going to end it on that. I found you more organized, Tyler. You found me more organized? When, like, discussing this, that's good. Because I know I kind of, like, was going off, but like I said, this is some of the concepts I talked about tonight are the first time I've talked about them, and I learned lessons tonight that we'll transfer over to next time. Looks like rotating crystals. It is rotating crystals, Esteban. You are a rotating crystal. Could a second invisible to our eyesight sun-type object make sense in your theory? Like an invisible sun? I've thought about it because I've heard some people claim that there's like a second sun and we live in a binary star system and that there's like one that you can't see. I have not been able to like really dive into it deeply, but if I ever make any kind of like have any epiphanies on it, I'll let you know. But I am curious about it. Some people, the only thing that I can think of is this. So remember that it's about inside, outside, separate, and oneness and objectivity. So sometimes what you can't see is because it's inside. And maybe we believe there's a molten core, they say, at the center of the earth. There is like stories of like, an inner world. Maybe if you are able to, and I said that, the perspective on the earth is a sphere in space orbiting kind of the sun, is the perspective that you see when you're outside of Earth. When you're inside Earth, you can see that it's flat and you can see a sun above you. But what happens when you're inside of inside? If you can even do that, that would maybe lead to like a totally different perspective. Maybe there's a sun. Maybe the Earth is orbiting a sun, which would mean that there's a sun at the center of the Earth. I'm getting really abstract, but like I'm trying to apply inside, outside, separate, and oneness to it. So like if the Earth is orbiting the sun from our perspective in outer space, then maybe inside of Earth, you would see Earth as like a sphere, and instead of basically how people perceive the surface of the Earth like this, you would see that on the inside, basically, which kind of makes sense with like when something is spinning, like if you're inside of a big cylinder and the cylinder's spinning, like that's how you can create artificial gravity, and in outer space it's like it'll suck you to the side. That kind of makes more sense than why don't we spin off the edge of the Earth if it's spinning. It's like maybe the spin then is what causes the gravity of inside the inner world, like what is it called? Journey to the Center of the Earth, and there would be like a sun. If there's a hidden sun, it would be like inside of Earth, I would think. Not just like in our solar system, but unseen. That is my theory. I'm not saying I believe that that's true. I'm just saying I would believe that that's true before I believe that there is a sun in our solar system outside of Earth, though, that is, just perfectly, rotating around our current sun, that then just makes it so it's somehow invisible to us. I don't know. Like, guys, I'm spitballing here. Like, that was totally off the cuff. But actually, that was more progress than I've ever made on it. But I don't know if that's true. Gonna have to ask whoever lives at the center of the Earth. Jules Verne, didn't he write that? Looks like wrote, yeah. Hey, yes. Okay, so I think that I'm going to end it there. If you have any final questions, I'll give you guys a minute or two to answer, but that was, a good night. I'm glad we got to talk about those stuff, because that stuff, even though I might not have been so easy to follow, I'll be easier next time because now I practiced this time. But I really appreciate everybody tuning in, as always. I really appreciate it that you guys are interested in this. If you would like to support the project, My website is in the description of the video on YouTube and in my bio on Instagram. If you would like to support it monetarily, there is a link in the description of this video to my Patreon and also on my website under the support page. I would really appreciate it, but if you can't do that, but you still wish to support, I will be giving out, like, I have lots of plans for the Patreon, but I'm trying to iron it out so that it's very objective. But one of them is I want to host like a Discord and have private Discord discussions where I will give my Patreon supporters or anyone else who would like to help the project, like maybe you take 5 minutes of this clip and you make a clips channel of Theory of Every0ne clips or something, and you do that, you let me know that you did that, and I will include you on the Patreon list. It doesn't have to be monetary support. But I am going to be making a Discord for us all so that we can have more voice-to-voice and even face-to-face discussions that are kind of also able to be semi-private, and I will be dispersing as soon as I'm done checking all the math on my sheets. I will eventually be first to my Patreon supporters, but eventually they will go up on my website, downloadable files so that you can get the calculative models of my structures of quantum of consciousness and of the universe, and then you can go and you can mess with it and see what you can find. And but we're gonna have like Discord discussions for Patreon members and just supporters who have helped in other ways, where I'll give you guys the files and then I'll have the file and then we can both work on it together and see what I can show you exactly what's happening, and then we can see what we uncover. Should be a good time. But thank you guys, and I will see you tomorrow at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Peace.